Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. I have a great guest, Dr. Paul Kengor.
Good to be with you. Great. Thank you.
We're going to discuss Russia collusion, really Soviet collusion.
Yes.
Democrat style.
Right.
Which is never discussed.
No.
You are a professor of political science at Grove City College. You are the executive director of the Center for Vision and Values. You've been at Grove City for 20 years, which is one of our finest colleges.
Yes, thank you.
You've written a lot about the Cold War. You've gone through some of the original documents that have become available since the end of the Cold War. I consider you, if not the expert, one of the top experts on what took place during the Cold War. And why do I want to discuss this tonight? I'll tell you why. Because one of the things that you address and you focus on is the extent to which Ted Kennedy, the lion of the Senate, the Kennedy family, that Ted Kennedy was colluding with, conspiring with, working with the Kremlin to defeat the re-election of President Ronald Reagan. This is never discussed on national television.
Never discussed.
Russia keeps coming up. There's no context for what's taking place today. What exactly happened with Ted Kennedy and Russia and the Kremlin?
Well, the date of the document is May 14th, 1983.
What document?
It is a document that was found in the Central Committee archives of the Soviet Union. And that would have been when they first started opening the archives when Boris Yeltsin became president after Gorbachev resigned in late 1991. And a document was found. It says Committee on State Security of the USSR across the top, which is KGB. And the author is Viktor Chebrikov, who was the head of the KGB. And he's writing to Yuri Andropov, who's the head of the Soviet Union. So right here, okay, you've got a document with the two top people in the USSR, Chebrikov, head of the KGB, to the head of the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov. And the subject head says, of special importance regarding Senator Kennedy's request to General Secretary Andropov. So right there, if that doesn't grab your attention, I don't know what does. And it says in the first paragraph that on 9/10 of this year, this would have been May 1983, that a Kennedy confidant, John Tunney, who had been the California Democratic senator, and he wasn't senator at that point, but he had been the 1970s.
Best friends with Kennedy.
Yeah, old law school classmates, and they said that he was there on behalf of Senator Kennedy making a request to the Soviets.
So he went to the Kremlin.
I don't know if he went to the Kremlin, but he was in Moscow. Mm-hmm. He was definitely in Moscow on behalf of Ted Kennedy. Now, before I continue to say what's in the document, this was found in the archives, 1991, 1992. It was first reported by the London Times in February 2nd, 1992.
And I assume the American media picked up on it. The news networks ran with it. The budding cable networks ran with it. Am I right?
Absolutely. They did not. They didn't do.
They didn't. They didn't touch it.
They didn't do a single thing with it. So first of all, it's Tim Sebastian was a reporter for the London Times. Also worked for the BBC. This is no right winger, right? BBC, London Times, and he reported on it. And in the London Times, just a little bit, tiny bit, didn't report didn't show the whole document or anything. There was a kind of a rush on the archives by different researchers who were there at the time to try to get a copy of the document. It was finally given to me when I was doing research on a book on Ronald Reagan.
What year would that be?
Well, that book was The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism, which was published in 2006. Okay. And by the way, it's published by HarperCollins. So this is a mainstream, highly respected press. And when I was told about the documents, 2004, 2005, the person who sent it to me, I said, does it really say this when you're saying this? He said, oh, yeah, it's worse. Wait till you read it. I got it. I published it in the appendix of the book.
And what does it say?
Okay. So the document said that Senator Kennedy, like other rational people, uses the word rational people, is very troubled by the state of U.S.-Soviet relations, the deterioration in U.S.-Soviet relations. And it blames this deterioration not on Yuri Andropov, not on the Kremlin, but on Reagan's belligerence. Actually uses the words Reagan's belligerence. And it says that this is due to Reagan's refusal to engage in any modification to his politics or policies. So Kennedy and the document at least its framing of Kennedy's offer. They're blaming this deterioration in U.S.-Soviet relations on Ronald Reagan.
So the Soviets are blaming him, or Kennedy's blaming them, or all of them are blaming?
Well, this would be the defense later of the Kennedy people is, well, that's their interpretation of this. But according to Chebrikov, he's couching this in the language of this is Kennedy's interpretation.
And Kennedy approached them. They didn't approach
Yes,
Kennedy.
Kennedy approached them through John Tunney. And Tunney, who would later comment on this in the original London Times article in February 1992, dismissed it and was like, it's not what people are trying to make of it. And when my first report on this in the Crusader was published in 2006, the only media source in the country that touched it was, you're from Philadelphia, the CN8, which is like a regional cable news outlet. I did that show, and they actually called Kennedy's office, and they said, "What's your response to this? With this professor's reporting in this book?" And they argued with the interpretation of the document.
Well, what did Kennedy want to do?
Well, it was couched within the context of the 1984 presidential election, which was just around the corner. This is 1983, spring of 1983.
So they're communicating, Kennedy is, through Tunney, in 1983.
That's right.
Right before Reagan's up for re-election.
Yes.
The campaign's ginning up. The Democrats are ginning up. Kennedy makes contact with the Kremlin through Tunney. What does Kennedy want to do with the Kremlin?
Well, so he offers to, he believes, according to the document, right, Kennedy believes that this deterioration is the fault of Reagan's, and not apparently the fault of the Soviet Union. In fact, it even uses the words that Kennedy is, quote unquote, very impressed with Andropov. Very impressed with Andropov, of all people, right? The Soviet dictator. So with the election coming up, and it's fascinating, Mark, there's actually a paragraph in here where you've got basically Kennedy and the Soviets agreeing that Reaganomics is working. Inflation is down, unemployment is great, and everything. So the only time you'll ever see them acknowledge that Reaganomics is actually working. And that being the case, is there any vulnerability for Reagan in 1984? And yes, it's these questions of war and peace. The Pershing II missiles, the nuclear freeze movement. So Kennedy offers to the Soviets to help them communicate to the American voters and the American public their peaceful intentions as he perceives them.
So Kennedy is prepared, in essence, to be a PR surrogate for Moscow.
I think that's a fair way to put it, yeah. In order to help them communicate better with the United States. And it says, Kennedy recommends that the following steps be taken. And I would encourage people to actually read the document in the book so they could read it word for word. But the steps would be that, first of all, Kennedy would go to Moscow and meet with Andropov. He would help arrange for Soviet political and military officials to come to the United States to directly talk to the American public, even offers to help set up interviews between Soviet officials and American journalists, and specifically named in the document are Walter Cronkite and Barbara Walters. So they're specifically mentioned in there. So they would come to the United States, and that way they could go unfiltered directly to the American public, communicate their beliefs. Kennedy would go over there and he would meet with Andropov. And the document ends with, Chebrikov says, I shall await instructions. This is the offer that's being made. And the final paragraph ends by talking about Kennedy's own presidential prospects and whether or not he would run in 1984 and definitely looking to run in 1988. So it's all couched within the context of the presidential election.
All right, let's unravel some of this. We have contact, we have offer from Kennedy, we have an effort to affect the upcoming re-election of Ronald Reagan, in other words, really to defeat Reagan, an offer to get the Kremlin and their propagandists, their generals and so forth, on American television, radio, in other words, in American media, by a top Democrat senator.
Very top.
Ted Kennedy.
I mean, 1980, he was challenging Jimmy Carter in the Democratic primary.
So let's bring this to today. Can you imagine if Donald Trump or Donald Trump's camp had done 0.1% of this?
Oh, and there's a smoking gun. There's an actual document.
There's more than a smoking gun. There's a nuclear blast here.
And the document is couched within policies, foreign policy, nuclear policies, the military, national security, the 1984 presidential election, and it's written by the head of the KGB
to the head of the government,
to the head of the Soviet Union. And so this would be like having a document by the current head of the Russian FSB, I think it is now, or GRU, directly to Putin. And it would say, here is an offer that's being made by Senator so-and-so on behalf of Donald Trump or whoever. It was all laid out right there.
Instead, Professor, we're left with there was a meeting with Donald Jr. and some others where nothing actually took place. Or now we read in the newspaper that perhaps Manafort shared polling information with somebody or something like that. We have calls for impeachment. We have calls for indictment. We have all kinds of calls. This is the same media that have completely ignored what you've discovered, what you've written about, what others have discovered, original documentation.
Yeah.
And if we had a prosecutor at that time, a special prosecutor at that time, who was of a mindset to prosecute a case like this, look what they would have.
Oh, yeah. And it gets even worse. So we reported first in 2006 where we published in the appendix of the book the actual translation, which comes out to about 2.5 pages. In 2010, I did a book called Dupes. I said, okay, we'll do this. We published the entire document in Russian, which is about 5 pages in Russian, and then followed with the English translation, hoping maybe this time they would pay attention.
I want to pick it up right there when we return.
Sure.
Because this is too important to speed through. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, most weeknights you Professor Kengor. So there's this communication from Kennedy. It's written up by the head of the KGB, sent to the head of the Communist Party, the head of the USSR. It's interesting the Democrats talk about the Logan Act. This would be a clear violation of the Logan Act. Right. Some people would even say this is treason. Whatever. What happened?
Well, that's the real scandal is we don't even know what happened because no one even asked Kennedy about it. No one reported on it. There weren't any articles in New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, anywhere.
So this first is revealed in 1992.
92, and then so the chronology. Now think about this. Kennedy died in 2009, so you got 17 years between 92 and 2009. My book came out in 2006, and it was there. And as I said, a CN8, not CNN, but CN8 reporter asked Kennedy's office about it, and they just issued a very tight little 1 or 2 sentences arguing with the interpretation of the document.
But this document that's in your book, and this document that's mentioned by the London Times and the BBC, the document's out there.
It's out there.
It's in your book. For years. It's published by a major publisher.
Yeah.
Congress doesn't hold a single hearing.
Right.
Congress is not interested.
By the way, imagine my relief, too, when the Kennedy people, the CNA reporters, so we contacted the Kennedy, and I thought, oh, here it comes. They're going to say, it's a forgery. Doesn't he know, the stupid professor, it's a forgery? They didn't say that. They didn't deny it. The document's real. So the document's real. But it begs the question, okay, what happened next? Did Kennedy go to Moscow? What was the next step? And frankly, here's really what happened. Andropov got very sick. In fact, Andropov, Kennedy was very impressed with. Cal 007, the 269 people who died in the Korean airliner that was shot down by the Soviets in September 1983. Reagan even wrote in his diary, word is that Andropov is very sick right now. So Andropov would be dead within a year of this offer. So maybe that happened. Maybe because Andropov got sick, they dropped the ball on it. They didn't follow up. But somebody, you think just having a general interest in the media would have at least called Kennedy, at least by 1992, to follow up on the London Times piece to find out what happened.
Chuck Schumer's elected to Congress, I believe, in 1981. He was born a member of Congress. Nancy Pelosi's elected to Congress